Take your bags and get out. You don't belong here." The manager's voice cut through the polished calm of the hotel lobby, his hand already gripping the suitcase of the woman in the red dress. He gestured toward the door as if removing trash, unaware that the woman he was throwing onto the street had, just 1 hour earlier, quietly completed the multi-million-dollar purchase of the entire hotel chain. His termination would be her first executive decision. This scene isn't just a fantasy of revenge. It's the explosive endpoint of a pattern documented in hotel lobbies across the country, where black guests are questioned, removed, or even met with police for the crime of simply being present. From a Microsoft executive dragged from a DoubleTree to a family confronted at a Hampton Inn pool, the bias screams a silent accusation: you don't belong. But what if the next person targeted held not just a room key, but the deed to the entire property? This is the story of that power flip, and the moment a humiliating assumption collided with absolute, undisputed ownership. Alicia Sterling wasn't born into a world of boardrooms. She built hers from the ground up, one calculated investment at a time. By 35, her venture capital firm, Sterling Forward, had quietly become a powerhouse, known for resurrecting undervalued consumer brands. But her newest target wasn't a struggling tech startup or a fading retailer. It was the troubled 200-property Grand Legacy hotel chain, a name that once meant luxury but now echoed with fading glamour and plunging profits. For Alicia, this wasn't just another acquisition. It was personal. A decade earlier, as a college student interviewing for a finance internship, she'd been subtly turned away from the lobby bar of a Grand Legacy, told it was for registered guests only, while white peers in jeans were served without question. The memory never left. It became fuel. The chain's problems were an open secret in the industry: aging properties, dated decor, a customer base that was dwindling as newer, trendier brands captured the market. But Alicia's analysts saw something else: prime real estate in undervalued locations, and a workforce demoralized by years of corporate neglect. Her offer, channeled through a discreet network of shell companies and legal representatives, was a lifeline the desperate board couldn't refuse. The deal was structured with ruthless efficiency: a 90% stake purchased in a single, all-cash transaction that would close at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. The board, relieved to be rid of their headache, asked no questions about the anonymous buyer's identity. They just wanted the wire transfer to clear. Meanwhile, at the chain's flagship property in the heart of the city, General Manager Robert Thornton was fighting a very different battle. To him, the hotel's decline wasn't about corporate strategy or market forces. It was about standards. His standards. Thornton, a 20-year company man with slick-back hair and a perpetual sneer, believed the problem was the wrong element drifting in from the street. He'd instituted what he called lobby purity protocols. His staff had standing orders to question anyone who didn't look like they had $400 a night room booked. Security was to be notified immediately if someone lingered too long without a key card visibly in hand. Multiple complaints had been filed against him with corporate human resources, but they were lost in the chain's bureaucratic chaos. To Thornton, these complaints were just proof he was doing his job. On the morning of the acquisition closing, Alicia made a decision. The papers were being signed in a lawyer's office 40 blocks away. She could have waited for the formal announcement, the press release, the welcome basket from a groveling board. Instead, she drove to the flagship Grand Legacy. She wanted to see the raw, unfiltered state of her new empire. Dressed in an elegant but understated crimson-wrapped dress, the color a silent touchstone of her own power, she entered the marble lobby alone, a single overnight bag in hand. She was just another black woman walking into a luxury space, immediately subjected to the calculus of suspicion that Jermaine Massey knew at the DoubleTree, that the family at the Hampton Inn pool knew. From his podium behind the concierge desk, Robert Thornton's eyes tracked her the moment the automatic doors sighed shut. His internal radar, tuned to his own biases, pinged. She wasn't on the expected arrivals list for high-tier guests. Her bag was too small for a true traveler. She wasn't looking around in awe. She was assessing, her gaze cool and analytical as it swept over the chipped molding, the tired floral arrangements, the disengaged staff. This, to Thornton, was not the behavior of a legitimate guest. This was the behavior of someone casing the place, or worse, someone who thought they could use the lobby as a free waiting room. He watched as she smoothly took out her phone, not to take a selfie, but to type a note. His suspicion hardened into certainty. Alicia was texting her lawyer. "Deal closed," she typed. The response was instantaneous. "Funds transferred. You own the keys, Alicia, all of them." A slow, private smile touched her lips. She was about to turn and introduce herself to the front desk manager to begin the process of revealing herself and setting a new tone, but she never got the chance. The sharp click of leather soles on marble approached from behind. She turned to face Robert Thornton, his name badge gleaming, his expression a mask of practiced disdain. He didn't ask if she needed help. He didn't offer a greeting. He looked from her face to her bag and then back, his lip curling. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of a bellhop and two guests checking in. "The public restrooms are around the corner on the street. This lobby is for guests of the Grand Legacy only." The assumption was so blunt, so arrogantly delivered, it momentarily stole the breath from her lungs. He reached down and wrapped his hand around the handle of her suitcase. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now." Alicia Sterling's hand clamped over his, stopping him cold. Her grip wasn't frantic, it was firm, final. "Remove your hand from my property," she said, her voice low but carrying across the suddenly quiet lobby. Robert Thornton blinked, more offended than intimidated. No one challenged his authority in his lobby. "Your property?" he scoffed, pulling his hand back as if burned. "This suitcase, I'm doing you a courtesy. The shelters fill up fast. Now I won't ask again." He gestured to a looming security guard who had materialized nearby. This was the exact script Jermaine Massey had faced in Portland. The assumption of trespass, the summoning of security, the public removal. But Alicia didn't move toward the door. She took a deliberate step closer to Thornton, her eyes locking onto his name badge. "Robert Thornton, General Manager, 22 years with Grand Legacy according to your LinkedIn." The casual reference to his personal profile threw him. "Your last performance review noted, and I quote, exceptional standards in guest vetting and lobby security." She wasn't reading from a phone. She was reciting from memory. Thornton's sneer faltered, replaced by confusion. How did this woman know that? "Corporate sent you?" he asked, his voice losing its booming certainty. "Is this some sort of secret shopper audit?" Alicia almost laughed. "No, Robert, this isn't an audit." She reached into the slim leather folder under her arm, not a purse, but a portfolio. From it, she withdrew a single sheet of paper, holding it so only he could see the letterhead. It wasn't a reservation confirmation. It was an executed asset purchase agreement from Sterling Capital Holdings, dated that very day, with the Grand Legacy chain listed as the acquired asset. The signature block at the bottom was clear. Alicia Sterling, managing partner and principal. Thornton's eyes scanned the page, his brain refusing to connect the dots. The anonymous buyer the board had whispered about for weeks, a faceless hedge fund. It was her. This woman in the red dress owned the building he was standing in, owned his job, owned the ground beneath his polished shoes. The blood drained from his face. The security guard, sensing the shift, paused his advance. Other staff behind the front desk were leaning forward, straining to hear. A guest had her phone out, recording discreetly. Thornton's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The foundation of his entire worldview, where he held the power to decide who belonged, cracked. Alicia let the silence stretch, let him drown in it. Then she spoke, her voice now clear and resonant, meant to be heard. "You were right about one thing, Robert. I don't belong here as a guest." She paused, making eye contact with the horrified front desk staff, the bewildered bellhop. "I belong here as the owner. My first executive decision is effective immediately. You are relieved of your duties. Security will escort you out." The sentence landed like a physical blow. Thornton staggered back a step. "You can't." "This is a mistake. You need to call corporate. You need to speak to Mr. Evans," he sputtered, reaching for the desk phone. Alicia nodded to the security guard, a young man whose name tag read Marcus. "Marcus, please ensure Mr. Thornton collects his personal effects from his office and leaves the premises. He is no longer an employee." Marcus looked from Thornton's purple face to Alicia's calm authority. The Harvard study on racial bias flashed in his mind, the instinct to defer to the white manager. But the paper in her hand looked very real. He made his choice. "Mr. Thornton, please come with me," Marcus said, his voice respectful but firm. As Thornton was led away, sputtering about lawyers and wrongful termination, the lobby remained in stunned silence. The guest with the phone was now filming openly, a slow smile spreading across her face. She was texting rapidly. "You are not going to believe what just happened at the Grand Legacy." Alicia turned to the cluster of frozen staff at the front desk. "My name is Alicia Sterling. As of 10 o'clock this morning, I am the majority owner of this hotel and this chain. Gather everyone. We're having a meeting in the conference room in 15 minutes. Now please." But the seismic shockwaves were just beginning to travel. Up in the corporate offices that were, technically, also now hers, panic was brewing. The board's administrative assistant had just received a frantic, incoherent call from a sobbing Robert Thornton. She patched it through to the now former CEO, Jonathan Evans, who was still packing his own desk. Evans listened, his face turning to stone. The anonymous buyer had revealed herself, and her first act was a public execution of a long-serving manager. This wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a hostile takeover in every sense. He immediately called an emergency conference call with the other ousted board members. They had signed away control, but they hadn't signed away their pride, their connections, or their desire for revenge. Back in the hotel conference room, Alicia faced 30 nervous employees. Housekeepers in uniforms, bellhops, front desk agents, a few junior managers. She stood at the head of the table, the signed purchase agreement displayed on a monitor behind her. "What you witnessed in the lobby," she began, "was the end of one way of doing business, a way that judges people by their skin color, their attire, or the size of their luggage. That ends today. It is illegal, it is immoral, and it is terrible for business." She saw heads nod, especially among the black and brown staff members. "My firm invests in potential. I see potential in these properties, but more importantly, I see potential in you. There will be changes, investments in renovations, new training, and a zero-tolerance policy for the discrimination that has clearly been tolerated here." A young woman, a front desk supervisor named Chloe, raised a tentative hand. "Ms. Sterling, what about the other hotels, the managers? Some of them are worse than Mr. Thornton." Alicia nodded. "We will be assessing every general manager in the chain. We will be reviewing every HR complaint that was buried, and we will be making changes." The room buzzed with a mix of anxiety and hope. But as Alicia outlined her vision, her phone began to vibrate incessantly. Calls from unknown numbers. Texts from her lawyer. The outside world was crashing in. Because the video had already escaped, the guest's clip, shaky but clear, had been uploaded with the hashtag calling your mom while black, a direct reference to the Jermaine Massey case. But this was different. This was the ultimate power flip. The caption read, "Manager tries to throw out a black woman for loitering, then finds out she just bought the whole hotel chain. Grand Legacy karma." It was catnip for the internet. Within an hour, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. News outlets, always hungry for a viral justice story, picked it up. "Hotel manager's racist assumption backfires spectacularly," read one headline. This was the exposure Alicia wanted, a public repudiation of the old culture. But it was also a weapon her enemies could use. On the emergency conference call, Jonathan Evans saw the video and formulated a plan. "She's emotional, reckless," he told the other former board members. "Firing a 20-year man without cause on camera to score social justice points, that's wrongful termination, that's defamation. We paint her as an unstable vigilante, not a savvy businesswoman. We leaked to the press that Thornton was following strict corporate security protocols that she, as the new owner, is now liable for ignoring. We tie her up in lawsuits until she wishes she'd never bought us." As Alicia finished her staff meeting, her lawyer, David Chen, called. "Alicia, we have a problem. You're trending, which is good for the brand shakeup, but the former board is circulating a narrative. They're claiming Thornton was a dedicated employee following anti-loitering policies to protect guest safety. They're suggesting you created a hostile situation to fabricate a viral moment. They're preparing a wrongful termination lawsuit. And they're hinting to reporters that your takeover might be financially unstable, that this is a publicity stunt to distract from a bad deal." Alicia felt a cold wave of fury. This was the counterattack. They were using the same tools she was: public perception, legal threats, to reframe her victory as hysteria. "What are our moves, David?" she asked, her voice steady. "First, we get ahead of it. We issue a statement outlining the documented history of complaints against Thornton which the old HR department failed to act on. Second, we announce the independent audit of all management practices. Third, we sue them first." "Sue them for what?" Alicia asked. "For fraud," David replied. "For selling us a chain with systemic operational liabilities they knowingly concealed. Those buried HR complaints, that's our evidence. They sold you a toxic asset." The battle lines were drawn, but in the court of public opinion, Alicia was winning. Comments flooded social media with stories from other Black travelers. The time they were asked for extra ID at a check-in. The time a hotel pool attendant asked if they were with a guest. The time they were simply stared at until they felt so uncomfortable they left. The Grand Legacy incident had become a symbol, but in the background, the legal machinery was grinding to life. Robert Thornton, now represented by a lawyer paid for by the former board, was preparing his lawsuit. And he wasn't just suing for his job back. He was suing for defamation, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming Alicia had publicly destroyed his reputation with false accusations of racism. Alicia sat in the now vacant CEO's office, staring at the city skyline. She had the power, she had the deed, she had the viral victory, but she could feel the walls closing in: the lawyers, the lawsuits, the whispered campaigns to paint her as the villain. She had wanted to fix a broken culture, but the old guard was fighting back with every dirty trick they knew. They weren't trying to win in the lobby. They were trying to bury her in paperwork and bad press until her grand vision collapsed under its own weight. Then an email arrived. It was from a name she didn't recognize, but the subject line made her blood run cold. "Complaints, Grand Legacy Flagstaff Manager Greg Bryson." She opened it. Attached were scanned PDFs of internal incident reports, dated over the past 3 years. A family denied a booked room because the father fit the description of a shoplifter. A Latina businesswoman whose corporate card was declined 3 times despite being valid, while white colleagues had no issue. A disabled Black veteran asked to prepay for incidentals in cash. The reports were all marked reviewed, no action required. The email's message was simple: there are more. In every hotel, they kept 2 sets of books, the one for the board and the real one. Find the real one. It was signed, "A friend of the front desk." This changed everything. This wasn't just about one manager in one lobby. This was a conspiracy of silence, a systemic pattern of discrimination actively documented and suppressed. The former board hadn't just been negligent, they had been complicit. They had sold her a chain knowing it was a litigious time bomb. David Chen's lawsuit strategy wasn't just a defense, it was a missile, and this email was the launch codes. But finding the real set of books, the physical or digital archive of these suppressed complaints, would be nearly impossible if the old guard had hidden them well. They had a head start of decades. She owned the hotels, but she didn't own their secrets. Not yet. The friend of the front desk was a woman named Maya. She called Alicia's office 20 minutes after the email, her voice a tight whisper. "I was the HR coordinator at the corporate office for 8 years, she explained. "I compiled those reports. Every quarter I'd send a summary to Jonathan Evans and the board. They'd mark them resolved and order me to archive the originals in a secure off-site system, a system not connected to the main network. They called it the Vault." Alicia put her on speaker so David Chen could listen. "Where is the vault, Maya?" David asked. "I don't know the physical location," Maya admitted, "but I know the system was managed by a third-party contractor called Ironclad Archives. The login credentials changed monthly, but the master access was always held by the CEO and the head of legal." This was the break they needed, but also a trap. If the old board got wind that Maya was talking, they would lock down or destroy the archive. David sprang into action, filing an emergency motion with the court to compel the preservation of all Grand Legacy records, specifically naming Ironclad Archives. Simultaneously, he sent a cease and desist letter to Jonathan Evans, putting him on notice that any destruction of evidence would be met with criminal obstruction charges. It was a race against time. But the old board was several moves ahead. Jonathan Evans had already anticipated this. The vault wasn't just a digital graveyard for embarrassing complaints. It was also a treasure trove of dirt on the board's own financial misdeeds, kickbacks from suppliers, inflated contract bids, unreported perks. Letting Alicia access it was not an option. His lawyer made a call to Ironclad Archives. Under the pre-existing contract, which was still valid until the end of the fiscal year, the board retained control of the archive. They issued a termination notice for the storage contract, citing breach of confidentiality by the new owner. Standard procedure for Ironclad was to begin a 72-hour data purging process upon contract termination. The clock started ticking. Alicia's team only discovered this when David received a terse email from Ironclad's legal department stating, "Pursuant to our agreement with the prior controlling entity, your access request is denied, and the data subject to your inquiry is scheduled for secure erasure in accordance with industry standards." They had 70 hours to stop it. David filed another emergency motion, but the court was slow. They needed a different lever. Meanwhile, Robert Thornton's defamation lawsuit hit the news, carefully framed by a PR firm hired by the old board. Headlines shifted. Fired hotel manager sues new owner for smear campaign. The narrative was subtly turning. Comment sections now had planted questions. What if the manager was just doing his job? Isn't it dangerous to let anyone loiter in a hotel? The viral victory was being eroded by a wave of manufactured doubt. Alicia knew she had to fight on both fronts, in the court of law and the court of public opinion. She authorized her PR team to release one of the suppressed complaint reports, the one about the disabled veteran asked for cash. The response was immediate and furious, putting the old board back on the defensive. But it was a stopgap. Without the full archive, she was fighting with one hand tied behind her back. Then Maya called again. "There's something else. I didn't put it in the email because I didn't have proof, but there was a pattern in the complaints. They weren't just random acts of bigotry by rogue managers." She took a shaky breath. The old board had a secret incentive program. It was called the Portfolio Enhancement Initiative. Managers in certain zip codes, usually neighborhoods that were gentrifying, were given quarterly bonuses based on a metric called guest profile alignment. It was a code. It meant reducing the number of Black and Hispanic guests and increasing the number of white, affluent-looking ones. The complaints from those locations, they weren't bugs in the system. They were the system working as designed. The revelation was monstrous. This wasn't just negligence, it was a coordinated, profit-driven campaign of exclusion. It was the Harvard bias study weaponized into corporate policy. Alicia felt a chill. She owned a chain that had been engineered to discriminate. David Chen's voice was grim. "This moves us from civil fraud into potential criminal conspiracy territory. We need that archive, Alicia. It's not just about winning a lawsuit, it's about burying them forever." With 50 hours left until the data purge, they got a lucky break. Marcus, the security guard who had escorted Thornton out, reached out. His cousin worked in it at Ironclad Archives. It was a long shot, but Alicia authorized David to make an offer, a significant reward for any information that could help them secure the data, plus a guaranteed job in the new company's security division. The cousin, a man named Leo, was disgruntled and underpaid. He agreed to talk. Leo explained the system. The vault was a physical server stack in a climate-controlled bunker beneath an ironclad facility in an industrial park. The data purge wasn't a digital delete. It was a physical destruction of the hard drives via degaussing and shredding, scheduled for 68 hours from now. The only way to stop it was with a court order delivered directly to the facility manager, or with the simultaneous authorization of 2 of 3 designated corporate officers from Grand Legacy's old board. Those officers were Jonathan Evans, the former head of legal, and the former CFO. "They're never going to authorize it," Alicia said. "We need that court order." But the judge was still deliberating. The old board's lawyers were filing motions of their own, claiming the archive contained privileged attorney-client communications and proprietary trade secrets. With time running out, Alicia made a desperate gamble. She called a press conference. Standing in the lobby where it all began, surrounded by staff including Maya and Marcus, she laid out the bones of the Portfolio Enhancement Initiative. She didn't have the hard evidence from the vault, but she had Maya's testimony and the pattern in the complaints she did have. "This was not one bad manager," she declared. "This was a corporate strategy to discriminate, sanctioned at the highest levels and then covered up. The former board is now trying to destroy the evidence. They have less than 3 days to wipe a server clean of their crimes. I am asking the public and the authorities to watch them. Do not let them erase this." The gamble worked in one way. It created a public firestorm. News outlets that had been parroting the old board's talking points now dug deeper. The phrase "secret bonus program for discrimination" was explosive. It triggered a secondary wave of outrage that dwarfed the initial viral video, but it also backfired. Jonathan Evans, realizing the game was up, made his own move. He didn't try to defend the program. He disavowed it entirely. In a statement to the press, he claimed the Portfolio Enhancement Initiative was a rogue operation run by a sin-sterminated mid-level executive, and that the board had been unaware of its discriminatory implementation. He was throwing a sacrificial underling to the wolves to protect himself and the others. He also announced that, in the spirit of transparency, the old board would voluntarily provide a sanitized version of the vault's data to regulators, with all privileged and irrelevant information redacted. It was a masterstroke. He appeared cooperative while ensuring the most damning evidence would never see the light of day. Alicia was cornered. The court, swayed by Evans' show of cooperation, delayed its emergency order. The clock ticked down to 24 hours. The physical destruction of the drives was imminent. Then Leo, the IT cousin, called with one last piece of information. "There's a failsafe," he whispered. "In case of a catastrophic system failure, there's a one-time offline backup of the entire server made every 6 months. It's stored on tape drives in a fireproof safe in the same bunker. The safe requires 2 keys. The facility manager has one. The other," he paused. "The other key is held by the client's designated officer. For Grand Legacy, that was the CFO. The backup is 6 months old, but it would have everything up to that point." The former CFO, a man named Arthur Brigham, had been silent throughout the entire scandal. He'd retired to Florida. David Chen dug into his background. Brigham was old school, not a fighter like Evans. He had also left the board on less than amicable terms, feeling sidelined in his final years. He was the potential weak link. With 12 hours to go, Alicia and David boarded a plane to Naples, Florida. They found Arthur Brigham on a golf course, a frail man in his 70s squinting in the sun. He listened to their plea, his face unreadable. They didn't ask him to betray his colleagues. They asked him to preserve the historical record of the company he'd helped build. They appealed to his legacy. "The truth is in that safe, Mr. Brigham," Alicia said. "Not the sanitized version, the real one. Help us stop them from burning it." Brigham looked at the sun setting over the fairway for a long time. Then he reached into his golf bag, and from a small zippered pocket he produced a single, unmarked brass key. He placed it in Alicia's hand. "I never liked Evans," he said quietly, "and I always knew that initiative would come back to haunt us. The code for the safe is the company's original federal tax ID number. He gave them the digits. Do what you have to do, but leave my name out of it. They had the key. They had the code, but they were still 2,000 miles away from the bunker, and the purge was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. the next morning. David called the facility manager at Ironclad, informing him that a representative of the true owner with proper authorization was en route to access the backup safe, and that any destruction of assets prior to that access would be considered theft. It was a bluff, but it might buy them an hour. Alicia and David raced to the airport, the key clenched in her fist. They landed with 4 hours to spare, speeding toward the industrial park as the sun rose. This was no longer about a lawsuit or a viral moment. It was a literal race to unlock a safe containing the soul of a corrupt corporation before the men who built that corruption could reduce it to dust. The final confrontation wasn't in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was in a concrete bunker, where the past was stored on magnetic tape, waiting to rewrite the future. The Ironclad Archives facility was a windowless concrete box in a sea of warehouses. At 8:45 in the morning, Alicia Sterling and David Chen presented themselves at the security gate, the brass key and a copy of the purchase agreement in hand. The facility manager, a weary-looking man named Roy, had been expecting them. He'd also been getting frantic calls from Jonathan Evans's lawyers, ordering him to proceed with the purge on schedule. Roy was caught in the middle, but the key and the federal tax ID code were undeniable authorizations. With 15 minutes to spare, he led them into the chilled, humming bowels of the bunker. The main server rack for the vault sat dark and disconnected, its data already wiped. But in the corner sat a heavy, fireproof safe. Roy used his key. Alicia used Arthur Brigham. The door swung open. Inside were 12 large tape drive cartridges, each labeled with a date range spanning back a decade. The backup, the complete unredacted truth. They didn't have time to review it there. David Chen had a courier from his firm waiting outside. The tapes were logged, sealed in evidence boxes, and driven directly to a secure forensic data lab under a judge's supervision. The old board's legal strategy collapsed within hours. The data was a damning, digital autopsy of the Portfolio Enhancement Initiative. Spreadsheets linked manager bonuses directly to demographic shift goals. Internal emails showed Jonathan Evans discussing how to gently steer the guest mix in certain locations. Memos from the legal department warned that the policy was a significant liability, but were overridden by the CFO, Arthur Brigham, who noted the substantial profit upside. The archive also contained the suppressed original complaints, hundreds of them, each a story of humiliation. It was everything Maya had said, and worse. The fallout was swift and severe. Federal regulators, now armed with the evidence, opened a formal investigation into Grand Legacy for systematic violations of the Civil Rights Act. The state attorney general announced a separate probe. Jonathan Evans and several other former board members were served with subpoenas. Their attempts to paint Alicia as reckless evaporated. Now they were the ones facing potential criminal charges for conspiracy and fraud. The wrongful termination lawsuit from Robert Thornton was dismissed by a judge who reviewed the archive and called Thornton's conduct the direct, intended result of a corrupt corporate policy. Thornton didn't just lose his case. He became a public symbol of the system, his career in hospitality effectively over. With the legal cloud lifting, Alicia moved swiftly to dismantle the old regime and build anew. She appointed Maya, the whistleblower, as the new head of human resources, with a mandate to rebuild the department from scratch. Marcus, the security guard who made the right choice, was promoted to director of security training. A sweeping, independent audit of every general manager was conducted. Of the 200 properties, 37 managers were immediately terminated for documented discriminatory practices. Dozens more were put on probation with mandatory retraining. For the first time, employees were given a truly anonymous, third-party managed channel to report misconduct without fear. The public transformation was just as dramatic. Alicia launched a multi-million-dollar campaign not to rebrand, but to reintroduce the chain under a new name, the Sterling Stay. The campaign's centerpiece wasn't a celebrity endorsement, but a series of short films featuring the real people from the suppressed complaints, the veteran, the businesswoman, the family, telling their stories, and then showcasing the new policies designed to ensure it never happened again. The slogan was simple: "You belong here." Bookings, which had initially plummeted after the scandal, surged. Travelers, particularly from communities of color, voted with their wallets, and the chain saw an unprecedented wave of new loyalty. But Alicia's most significant change was structural. She instituted a community board for each hotel, comprised of local leaders, civil rights advocates, and past critics, with real oversight power over guest relations policies. She ended all exclusive deals with vendors who had been part of the old board's kickback schemes, reinvesting the savings into employee wages and property upgrades. The Sterling Stay became a case study in ethical turnaround, featured in business schools and diversity conferences. 1 year to the day after the lobby confrontation, Alicia returned to the flagship hotel. The marble was the same, but everything else had changed. The staff greeted her with genuine smiles, not fear. She was there to meet Clara Watkins, the disabled veteran whose complaint had been buried. With Maya and David Chen present, Alicia personally apologized and presented Clara with a symbolic deed to a fully paid condominium in a building the Sterling Stay had helped finance for affordable veteran housing. It wasn't a settlement, it was restitution. The moment was private, but Clara agreed to let it be the final story in the "You Belong Here" campaign. The video of their meeting, of Alicia handing over the keys, closed the loop on the narrative that began with a manager handing over a humiliation. The final, surprising detail emerged quietly. During the forensic audit of the old board's finances, a trail was discovered. For years, a small, anonymous monthly donation had been made from a shadow account to a nonprofit that provided business grants to Black women entrepreneurs. The donations totaled over $200,000. The accountant for the old board, facing pressure, confessed that the fund had been set up by Arthur Brigham, the former CFO. It was his secret, personal restitution, a guilty conscience made manifest. When asked, Brigham, from his Florida retirement, would only say, "A business should build people up, not tear them down. I helped with the tearing. I tried to do a little building too." The money from that fund had, years earlier, provided the critical seed capital for a young Alicia Sterling's first startup. She had never known where the angel investment truly came from. The system that had tried to exclude her had, in a twisted, secret way, also fueled her rise. The irony was not lost on her. It reinforced her mission, to build systems that were transparent, equitable, and left no one needing to hide their conscience in a shadow account. The story that began with a suitcase being dragged across a lobby ended with a culture being dragged into the light. Robert Thornton became a management textbook example of toxic bias. Jonathan Evans faced disbarment from his law license and a lifetime of civil lawsuits. The Sterling Stay chain, once a symbol of faded exclusion, became a benchmark for inclusive hospitality. And Alicia Sterling, the woman in the red dress, proved that the most powerful response to "You don't belong here" isn't just to claim a space, but to rebuild it so everyone can belong. The viral video was the spark, but the real fire was the transformation it ignited, a fire that warmed rather than burned. The story of the Sterling Stay is more than just a satisfying tale of comeuppance. It's a blueprint. It shows how a single, brazen act of bias can crack open a facade, revealing the rotten machinery of systemic discrimination that hums quietly beneath the surface of polished lobbies and corporate mission statements. For every Alicia Sterling with the resources to force a reckoning, there are thousands of German Masseys, Clara Watkinses, and unnamed travelers who absorb the humiliation and move on, their stories buried not in a fireproof safe, but in the silent archive of endured microaggressions. The viral moment was the spark, the cathartic flash of justice we all crave. But the fire that mattered was the tedious, unglamorous work that followed. The forensic audits, the whistleblower protections, the policy rewrites, the cultural rehabilitation. Real change isn't declared in a single moment of power reversal. It's built line by line in an employee handbook, decision by decision in a hearing committee, and interaction by interaction at a front desk. Alicia's victory wasn't ultimately that she owned the hotel, but that she transformed its very purpose from exclusion to belonging. This case exposes the lie at the heart of so many corporate apologies, that discrimination is merely the work of a few bad apples. The archive from the bunker proved it was a cultivated crop, tended with bonus structures and watered down with suppressed reports. The challenge for any industry, from hospitality to banking to tech, isn't just to root out the Robert Thorntons. It's to dismantle the invisible incentives that create them, and to build systems where the Mayas and Marcuses of the world are empowered to speak up long before a scene goes viral. So the next time you walk into a lobby, a store, or an office, remember the calculus of belonging is often a silent, biased equation. The real power isn't just in owning the building, but in rewriting the rules so that everyone inside it feels, unequivocally, that they have a right to be there. The work is never finished, but stories like this light the path. If you found this dive into power, justice, and systemic change compelling, make sure to subscribe. We're just getting started.